Okay, I wanted to mention this other researcher, Jan Walleczek, I think is how his last name is pronounced, but he was recommended by Basil J. Hiley, aka BJ, when he was talking at the 2017 symposium for the Fetzer Fund, Fetzer Institute, which I guess is in the UK somewhere. And so I checked out Jan. He was giving a talk on Bell's inequality, and he was explaining the non-signal theorem in non-locality. And he had written a paper on this, and he said it got the most views of any paper for the, I think it was like more views than all the other papers combined for that year in the Foundations of Quantum Mechanics journal. And so basically the argument is that the Nobel Prize went to the Bell's inequality a couple of years ago. But what standard physicists assume is that if you have non-locality, that means you also have non-realism, which is to say it's there's no signal. There can be no signal. And I mentioned a recent paper that was by Ephraim Seidenberg, I think is his last name, Steinberg, something, and about how they discovered this superluminal time reversed photon signal. Well, they said, well, it's just in the quantum wave function, so it's not an actual signal, but it exists in quantum time. So it physically exists, but there can be no information transfer as a signal, so it doesn't violate relativistic causality. So Jan's big point in this 2017 talk is that John Bell, in his inequality experiments that proved this non-locality, changed the definition of signal. So in 1964, he had a signal based on information, which is what the standard scientists assume. But in the realistic models of physics, which is what the David Bohm model is that you have an actual real world that exists and not just a indeterminate statistical foundation of reality. And so in the realistic model, the signal is defined by it being not random. So it's no longer a communication definition of a signal, but it's just a information definition that it's not random and there's a correlation. And so this is what Jean Brimont means, Professor Jean Brimont, who focuses on the Bell's inequality, when he says there is indeed spooky action at a distance. And that's what Bell's inequality proved, that you do indeed have this instantaneous correlation. And the fact is that it's not random. And so how is that defined as a signal? All it means is that it is it's deterministic, but it's not predetermined by the scientists or whoever is engaging with this level of reality. And So the scientist still makes a free choice. There's still free will, but the determinism is not pre-controlled. It's uncontrolled. So how Jan explains this is that the Bohmian model is actually a complex model of reality that then classical physics emerges from. But of course, Basil J. Hiley, and when he recommended Jan, his whole talk was about how Bohmian physics is actually non-commutative. So you have this deeper non-commutative process that is called a two-way derivative when you convert it into classical physics. And I even typed that into Google search because I just wanted to see what would come up. And AI said that unfortunately there is no real information on the two-way derivative. So I stumped AI with that two-way derivative question, which is pretty funny. But it just means that you have a left and right derivative, and so you have the future and the past, and the derivatives are discrete, so there's no continuum. So it's what David Bohm called pre-space as the implicate order as a process, and Basil J. Hiley says that they realized this was a non-commutative process in 1984. That's when they first published it. But David Bohm realized it was a process back in 1965. Is when he first started publishing on that. And so this is what I was talking about, where in meditation as quantum biology, when you have an understanding of the non-commutative quantum physics, that's how you can have the superluminal signal, because it's not random and it's not controlled, so it's based on logical inference. And so that means that you use a listening process and you logically infer that something exists, even though you don't have any specifics of what it is. It's just called formless awareness. And so it's this active information from the future, and it's deterministic, but from the perspective of the individual, it's not predetermined. So that's why it's always like a mystery, and yet you can logically infer that it already exists. And that's what makes it non-local and exists before a linear space-time. So that's why Einstein was debunked by the Bell's inequality. And as my own quantum physics professor, Herbert J. Bernstein, he published a recent paper on how you can set up a entangled photon experiment that just uses one photon, and therefore there's no need to use statistics in quantum physics to show this superluminal correlation that's not random. It's not, if you don't have to use statistics, and that's what the noncommutativity is. It's just this algebraic process. So as Basil J. Hiley explains, it's essentially the equivalent of the transition amplitude probability which is what Feynman was using when you convert it back into classical physics. In other words, when you assume that a particle and a momentum exists, but in terms of the non-commutative algebra, you have the momentum and the particle are embedded in each other as this phase space. So it's what they call a quantum blob, because the particle doesn't exist except as an average of this forward and backward time and frequency process. And so it's the imaginary negative frequency that is the quantum potential It's also called the osmotic velocity or osmotic momentum. Um, and it's, of course, I understand this from music theory. And Basil J. Hiley said he loved my music article. I don't know which one that was, so but just thanked him for that comment. And so that's pretty much it. It's nice to have this validation by Jan Walleczek. Walleczek. I can't remember his last name, but I'll give the links to his talk on down in the video description. And he gave another fascinating talk on disproving the statistical claims for the paranormal. And like I said, I've never been a fan of statistics. I did take statistics at the university, but anyway, so that's another interesting talk he gives. But he's not saying the paranormal doesn't exist. He's just saying that that's not a good approach to proving the paranormal or whatever. But on the other hand, if you understand what a signal means in terms of it being not random and a correlation that's actually defined by this deeper non-commutative process, then as Basil J. Hiley published in 2022, that this changes quantum biology, that non-commutativity changes the meaning of quantum coherence in biology, because the non-commutativity can self-amplify into the macro scale. And that's exactly what is happening with the Nagong meditation, or the three gunas of Indian philosophy, when you do these kind of practices based on the music theory. And that's my own focus, is the music training going back to like 225,000 years ago, because that's when the so-called pygmies, split from the San Bushmen originally, according to the DNA science. So just leave it at that, and I'll post a link to this other researcher's talk